Hello, my name is Raymond Akins, and I'm awfully glad to be here with you this morning on behalf of Always Memorial. They've made possible the opportunity to share with you this interesting video we are making for our professional funeral community. Our first production has to do with the issue of growth. And we're always concerned about growth, but what makes it especially interesting in the current time is the rapid change that's going on within our industry. And I want to take you through this presentation because we want to examine exactly how does a firm go about optimizing or maximizing their growth. And this presentation will take you through those steps. But before we start, it's always good if all our listeners or viewers can start out on the same page. So I'm going to give you an overview of what I think are the common circumstances that are impacting our industry today. And let's start out with what we all agree on, for example. And you'll notice throughout this presentation that you'll see a little circle with a check mark on it. The purpose of the circle and check mark is to draw your attention to the information that's contained in that particular slide, because we think that's important that you keep note of as you map out the strategy that we hope you'll be encouraged to adopt by the end of this presentation. So let's start out with number one. I'm going to go through this a lot faster. Everybody agrees that our job is to give the customer what they want. The customer is looking for a satisfactory conclusion to an immediate problem. They've had a loss in their family. Congruence makes it easier to create those valued outcomes that we so much desire. And what do I mean by congruence? I'm talking about a meeting of the mind between the funeral director and the family. But here's the point, and here's our first check mark, our green check mark, no circle there. But your clients are not always easily understood in such a way that you can easily achieve a congruence of the mind. I think the best discussion on that subject, and I put a footnote here, is that you consider acute loss management. And that is a theory in thanatology that was founded by Carl Jennings, and it speaks to the 10-day period between the onset of loss and the conclusion of the funeral service, where the funeral director has the opportunity to dramatically improve the outcome of the family. The family wants professional and highly skilled help, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm just going to put this slide up as a footnote. I want you to keep this in mind. The average age of an at-need customer today is late 70s, early 80s. The average age of a pre-need funeral customer is early 70s. For the sake of this presentation, I'm not going to deal with the cemetery portion, so we're going to keep forward. But keep note of that. In particular, note the change from the year 2015 to the expected occurrences that happened by the year 2035. Let me try and make that clear. Look at 2015 and you look at the average age of an at-need customer. It's somewhere in their late 50s to late 60s. By 2035, roughly another 15 or more years from now, they'll be in their late 70s and early 80s. Pay attention to that difference. The average age of your pre-need customer in 2015, they were under 60 years of age. By 2035, again, in another 15, 20 years or so, they'll be in their early 70s. The volume, the number of people who are your average at-need customer is slated to double over the next 15 or so years. And your pre-need funeral customer, that too is going to almost double from where it is today. So this gives us some beginning to how should I say it? Let's take this as the foundation for building our insight about the future in this industry. The biggest thing is the aging of the population. Look at this particular graph here. It's titled, the theme is the aging of the population. And you notice that the general population, that's the blue line that's at the very bottom of the graph. Notice its slope or its growth, how it expands from the year 2014 to the year 2060. Overall, that will be the expansion of the general population. However, I'd also like you to look at the subcomponents of that general growth line. That's the line that appears above my dash line. I'm trying to point this out as best I can. I want you to focus on two things: age 65 and up, population of people age 65 up, and the size of the population of people who are age 85 and up. Notice that relative to that general population growth line, you have exploding subcomponents. That is, the people age 65 and up, are growing fast, but look at what happens in less than the next 15 years. The people age 85 and up begins to overtake them and grow at almost what looks like to me an astronomical rate of growth. So, what are our customers doing when they're shopping for funeral services? Well, I checked with the September issue of the Director magazine. That's a publication that's issued by the National Funeral Directors Association. And we've noticed some very subtle but significant shifts in how our customers are shopping today. For example, when asked the question, how many funeral homes did you visit or call before you made your choice? Look at this. Today, in 2018, 2 out of 3 people, they're not calling anyone else. They know at the time of loss the funeral home they want to select. Compare that. Look at the next 3 bars, and you'll see that in 2016, the people who visited other funeral homes before making their choice, that was like 81% of the population. It shrunk in 2017 to 74, roughly 3 out of every 4. But by 2018, only 1 out of every 4 at-need families would check with another funeral home before they made the choice. Is this evidence of strong brand reputation and brand awareness? I'm not quite sure, but clearly people's shopping practices are changing. They favor the strong firm, they don't favor the also-rans. When asked the question, why did you visit or contact more than one funeral home? Very valid question. Why did you go to another funeral home? Look at this. In 2018, over 2 out of 3 only did so to compare prices. About half were to check for available options. Maybe the funeral home didn't have the facility available that day, or maybe there were some other circumstances that caused the people to see or check out other available options. You got half of the people who contacted more than one funeral home checking on available options. When you look at issues like best customer service, checking availability, finding a convenient location, the percentages, the numbers just drop dramatically. Clearly, the families that come to you for the first time is your bread and butter. I hope I made that clear. I'm going to emphasize that a little more as we go. Again, ask the question, what is the key to generating growth in an operating environment that is shifting and is very fluid? Here's the key point. I got to notice another green arrow, the circle. Once you're firm, the implications of the 2 charts that we just looked at prior make clear that if your firm is selected or entrusted to perform a funeral service, it is very critical that you meet or exceed their expectations. Also, that you put on such a display of professionalism that witnesses to the process walk away impressed and tend to hold your firm in a higher level of esteem as compared to your competition. When it's over, they may not need you, but if they were well served, they certainly won't forget you. What foundational understanding is necessary as we approach this challenge? There are only 3 core strategies for your firm's growth. The first strategy is fairly obvious. We want to grow our revenue, right? How do you do that? You want to remain relevant to your customers. Also, you want to drive pre-need sales now and into the future. And I'll come back to that point a little bit later. Look at the next box, which is leveraging scale. We've got to explain what that means. This is the second core strategy and probably what I think is the most critical of all. That is, you need to develop within your organization a group of competent, I call them sales professionals, but or counselors, however you want to do it. They must be competent at their job. You want to optimize your network and the technology used to interface with your customer, and you want to work on your pre-need backlog. Let me go over that again. This is really important. This is the core strategy. We want to develop our organization within. We want to strengthen the competencies of your staff people. You want to network. You want to optimize your network, and that is how your customer finds you online, how they interact, whatever strategies that you use to get closer with your customer. Then, of course, we want to always focus on pre-need. Again, that's another point I'll get back to you. I'll get back to later in the presentation. The third core strategy is capital deployment. But what's really interesting about capital deployment is that a lot of people select that as their first core strategy. In other words, capital deployment means if I spend money, if I make improvements, my customers, I'm going to increase my customer traffic. That's only valid up to a point. It's proven mathematically time and time again that as you make investments to improve your structure, the more investment you make over time, the lower the return is on that investment. Why? Because generally improvements are financed with debt, and your firm's capital structure can become stretched and your credit quality declines as a result. It makes more sense that if you go back to strategy number 2, and that is develop your sales organization, improve your effectiveness so that you can grow your revenue, then you earn the money to deploy capital. You don't spend necessarily on a number of capital improvements without having addressed what is going on at the inner core of your company. I mentioned funeral planning a couple times, and here's what, if you aren't aware, critical that you know of. 2016, funeral planning surpassed and became the #1 generator of revenue for the funeral industry, surpassing merchandise. Make a note of that. Commoditization, there's been a lot of talk about that. And what do we mean when we say commoditization? Well, if you're no different from anybody else, if all your offerings are the same, there's nothing special about the way you serve your families. People are indifferent. you're pretty much similar to everyone else out there in the marketplace. But statistics show time after time, it is the firms who are different that tend to be rewarded. But customer surveys show that only 20% of the companies they do business with actually tend to be different. 2% are very different, whereas approximately 20% are different or somewhat different. We want to emphasize that difference is what tends to be rewarded most. I think that's pretty clear. So let's go on. Summarize where we are right now. I think when I understand my market, I tend to be confident. The problems are well understood. My market is predictable, among other things, and the traditional business offerings that I use in my marketplace tend to be sufficient. However, uncertainty arises when you have a market that's in transition, and that's probably where we are now. The problems are not well understood. We're dealing in many cases with new entrants into the market and, of course, new products and services that customers find attractive. Your market, therefore, is unpredictable and traditional approaches tend to fail. And as a result, you have folks that tend to feel in our industry discouraged, worried, concerned. So, which of the following do you think you would prefer for yourself? This again is the survey conducted by the National Funeral Directors Association, and for the most recent year, you'll find out that approaching two out of every three people are now choosing cremation. Casket burial is shrinking. So let's face it, the reality is that people are shifting towards cremation, and it doesn't look as though the trend is going to change. As a matter of fact, and this is a kind of a recap, in 2015, we crossed a significant line. If you'll check these two, the blue line is burial, and as you can see, the funeral and burial in 2015, the number who made those selections were approximately equal. Cremation may be running just a little ahead. However, by 2035, it's projected to decline to only about 15% of the population. What's the point I want to make? The point I want to make is that close to 80% of the people in the next 15 or 20 years are going to be choosing cremation. There's just no way of avoiding that. So we might as well face that reality and accept it. So the three core strategies that I talked about before, in terms of pursuit of revenue, our goal is to remain relevant in our marketplace. We want to focus on driving pre-need sales now and into the future. To do that, we must enhance our sales organization or our funeral professionals that interact with the public. And I'm not just talking about the funeral directors. I'm talking about the staff in your office who answer the telephone. I would recommend strongly that you work on nailing your customer interface in all of those aspects. And that is what leads to the optimization of your network. Now, if you're successful on revenue growth and leveraging scale, then you'll have the revenues to deploy capital in a very strategic manner that will enhance or increase your return on investment. I hope all this makes sense. Too many people, however, blow their wad by focusing on only the capital deployment part of it. But to be honest with you, that only comes after that's most effective, the capital deployment, after you've tightened up how your internal operation is structured. Next slide. This is just more information that was provided by the NFDA. Clearly, there's a strong tendency of people to go online. Online marketing, especially by social media like Facebook and what have you, is relatively low cost, and it gives the firm an opportunity to go out and contact their public without a lot of costs involved in doing that. So it's no doubt about it, social media is here to stay, and the NFDA's 2018 Consumer Awareness and Preferences Survey lays this out and shows funeral directors have a unique opportunity if we apply our growth strategy in a way that makes more sense than many have maybe traditionally used in the past. So again, I'm coming back to my question. I'm going to stay on this. What is the key to generating growth in an operating environment that is shifting and fluid? Number one, we need to look at our organization and develop a clearly defined strategic plan for the business over the next 12 months. That's how you start working on this today. Again, what is your vision for your company? What is the mission? What are the values you want your firm to represent? Are your employees on the same page? And that's what we're really trying to center on. If they're not on the same page, you're going to go through an exercise that's very similar to what we described here on this particular slide. And that is, we're focusing on identifying practices and systems in our business that are causing inefficiencies. You can start working on that now if it's nothing more than just a staff meeting with your employees or fellow associates and asking for their input without being judgmental but open-minded, so we can begin collecting some data that we can have a lot of confidence in. So in conjunction with that, we go to look for our online strategy. What kind of tools are we going to use to employ in the business to increase awareness about our operations? If you don't have those skills, that is an inefficiency or a weakness. It is a low-cost approach to advertising that you're not able to take advantage of. It is very worthwhile, worth the effort, to find someone that's capable of assisting you in that. Now remember, all throughout this, I'm talking about us being in, when I say us, we funeral practitioners, being in a period right now, it's going out for about another dozen or more years that'll essentially represent a transition, but one that is gaining strength. You can't wait 15 to 20 years and begin to plan on how you want to react. The time is really to start right now. So what can be done starting right now? Growth will require, this is the summary part, that you be better skilled at creating great customer experiences. Talk to your staff, find out what do they see, and what are the things that we may not be doing that we could implement that will ensure our customers will have a greater experience. This is working with your team, and when you go and approach your team with questions like this, or when you have staff meetings, you're showing that you respect their ideas, and you also want to create a safe place so they can bring these matters up for discussion, because they are absolutely critical, and that information is what also helps everyone come closer to being on the same page. You're interacting with your customers, and emotions play a strong role. So clearly, the more in touch you are with your clients' emotional wants and needs, the more products and services you'll be able to offer that will resonate with the customers. That makes a lot of sense. A single focus on profit maximization can bring you into direct conflict with the interests of your customers. The best way to explain that, and I'm sure everybody can come up with the story to match this understanding, is you can be cheap with certain products that are thrown in with your packages and they look cheap. Or products that are provided in your package to your families, they may cost a little bit more money, but their quality is so high that the customer has the experience of their expectations being exceeded. I hope you understand the point I'm trying to make there. So if I want to be cheap, I'm going to use the cheapest products. I'm going to use the cheapest pens. I'm going to use the cheapest bags that I get back to my families. If I want to distinguish my firm, if I want my firm to be regarded as top of the line, I will use the best products in these categories I just talked about. You spend a little bit more money, but the return on that investment over time seems to justify the expenditure. Don't be cheap. Personalization and customization are becoming the norm, and it's raising customers' expectations in the process, which is another reason why you want to be different. You must distinguish yourself. If you're just like everybody else, people tend to not see anything particularly special. And they also, as a result, be less inclined to pay up or match the charges that you offer for your services. So bottom line, businesses have little choice but to concentrate on delighting their customers if they really want their business to grow forward. I hope you get that point. Trying to stress that. And this means that the team must come together and work towards the same goal. We're getting close to a summary before I have a kind of free-form discussion. And I just want to summarize what all of this represents, because at the end of the day, the goal is that we remain relevant. We want to drive pre-need sales now and into the future. To do that, we must enhance the development of our organization and develop a network that will reach out to your customers and create themes that resonate with what their wants and needs are. Take care of those two and your revenue is going to grow, and then you can employ your capital and expect a positive return on that investment, as opposed to a return that's going to decline over time. I mentioned earlier the theory that was espoused by Carl Jennings, and if anyone remembers him, Carl Jennings founded the Arrangers Academy. That was a training program for funeral directors, and I've worked with Carl for many years, and we conducted a series of tests. We did kind of like focus groups in terms of trying to discover what approaches resonated most strongly with your families. And the bottom line that he came up with was what the family needs and wants most of all. Whether they tell you outright, sometimes they don't know because of other circumstances that are clouding their present situation, but the customer wants healing. The customer is looking for a solution to an immediate problem, and they're coming to the funeral professional hoping to receive a modicum of satisfaction, but the funeral director, if he really understands that the fundamental need is healing, what they'll do instead is to inquire what is really going on in the heads or minds of the family. And this requires listening. I could probably do a whole presentation just on the subject of acute loss management. What it says is that many times, or oftentimes, and this is unfortunate, the funeral director is emphasizing what he or she needs from the customer more so than what it is the customer is struggling with. Acute loss management is a form or approach to looking into the situation with a strategy for conducting an inquiry that'll have the person open up, and also to have the funeral director respond in ways that confirm understanding. Confirming understanding in the minds of your customer is what leads to the congruence and the possibility of the parties creating a funeral service with the highest possible outcome. That's saying a mouthful, but I'm trying to think. Carl Jennings' book was When We Must Say Farewell. It is written for funeral directors, and I'm going to offer you a really interesting challenge that Mr. Jennings poses to his public. He says, if you really want to know if your funeral home, the funeral home that you contact, understands what it is you need, all you have to do is call the funeral home and say, why should I pick you? Why should I select your establishment? If the funeral director responds, because we have the parking lot, or we have a repast room, or we have modern fleets and cars, he or she is not really telling you anything that has to do with your situation. They really don't know or don't understand that what customers really want from our funeral home providers is that we provide a space for the experience of healing. The theme of an aging population, this is slide number 4. I'm going to do this over again. The area that is so key to our understanding about the future in funeral services, and what distinguishes it between the person who tends to have, the professional who tends to have a positive outlook versus the person who thinks the sky is falling, has to do with our awareness of what's going on with the aging that's taking place within our society. The experts call it the silver tsunami, or you've had sociologists refer to it, the phenomena, as an age wave. I really want you to understand what we mean when we talk about an age wave or a silver tsunami. And I think this graph best captures that. Let's look at this. Take in the whole scene first, and then I'm going to draw your attention to particular sections on the graph. If you'll look at the very bottom, and you see a line, and I've identified that line as representing the general growth of the population here in the United States. And it begins in 2014, but the general population growth out to the year 2060 shows an increasing number of people that are alive and on the planet. But here's where things take a very interesting turn. Let's look at the lines, the 2 lines above my general population growth. I want to go to the second line, and that is also a lighter blue line, but that line represents the population that's age 65 and up. If you look at that, you'll see that relative to the general population, the age 65 and up segment is growing relatively much faster. By the same token, look at the gray line, that is representing the population that's 85 and up. Something happens between 2018, where we are right now, and approximately another, well, less than 15 years, and you see the people who are 85 and up, they are expanding, even compared to the 65 and up population. The segment representing those who are 85 and older is growing even faster. It's estimated by the year 2050, 1 in every 5 adults in the United States will be among the oldest old. The oldest old are the people who are 85 and up. Their population is living longer, but they're not living, but they're living with discomfort. They have a longer time between the onset of major illness and death, but because they're living longer, they're going to experience periods of going in the hospital, back home, back to the emergency room, to the hospital, and at one point out in time, it may be a nursing home, or they may send you home from the hospital to die. That's what people are going to be experiencing with this huge boom of senior citizens that will be living on the planet at some point in the future. Why is that important? That is because the people who are going through this ordeal will need help and will need assistance. They will be searching for information. This presents a very unique opportunity for the funeral practitioner to design information, much like what we're trying to do here with this video, and put it out there for the public. Matter of fact, I'm very grateful to Always Memorial for allowing me this opportunity, and this is the first time I've ever done something like that, but I can guarantee you I am on board 100%, and we'll work at improving these presentations, because the message we want to take to our fellow funeral professionals is one of hope. It is far from despair. At some point, your business has every possibility of thriving in a way you may never have imagined. My point in this whole presentation is to strongly encourage that all owner-operators and staffs really take a look and consider what are the factors that go into developing a strong growth profile. And you got the 10 to 15 years starting right now to work on that. It is always a work in process, and practice makes perfect. You've got to practice. Your customers are going to be looking for assistance in areas that are related to not only planning, but benefits that are received at the time of death. And you probably ought to have a website. On your website, you probably ought to have information. Matter of fact, we've looked at many websites, and the best ones are the ones that try and address or offer more understanding of what we think the public, by and large, is experiencing as they grow older. I hope I made myself clear on that. I'm awfully excited about the subject, and hopefully you'll feel inspired to do the same. Now, at this point, I want to kind of provide a recap, maybe tie everything I've talked about together into a whole that's a little more digestible. Here's the important thing. We know how people are shopping today. A lot of them are not, despite the industry's encouragement, the Federal Trade Commission, etc., that people shop around. There really doesn't seem to be, according to these surveys, very many people doing a whole lot of shopping around. They know where they want to go at the time of death. Funeral directors, whatever you've been doing, it's obviously working. You've done a great job. Anytime you have 2 out of 3 individuals saying how many funeral homes, when asked how many funeral homes that they contact at the time of loss, and when the response is none, when 2 out of 3 people know where they're going to go, that is clearly reflective of the fact that they know you, they understand you, you've been relatively successful in establishing a positive brand image. But I want to remind you, if you are not among the firms that are called the 2 out of 3 times, then you fall into the category of approximately 25% of the respondents who say they've gone to another firm to either check prices or check availability. I want to emphasize, if you receive a call from a family who's already talked to one company, chances are, after the conversation with you, the odds are very low that they'll be talking to anyone else. So I really want to emphasize what to me is extremely important, and that is the person on the desk who answers a phone call when the family is calling about shopping or when they want a question asked about prices. So many firms, and I know this from experience, don't devote a whole lot of training in that area. But if you're going to capture a customer who, let's say, is making a second call to a service provider, that's your opportunity to grab that customer and bring them into your fold, which is why the second core strategy, working on your internal environment, building a strong, again, I keep going to the word sales organization, but it's a customer service. Building a strong customer service organization is what's going to increase the odds of you getting that call. But once you've been selected, oh, thank goodness, once you've been selected to perform a service, then it becomes critical that you meet or exceed expectations. And I think Carl Jennings speaks about this he goes in, there's a lot of elaboration in his book, When We Must Say Farewell, and his theory of where he introduces acute loss management. So it's critical that you capture the caller, it's critical that you capture the shopper, and it's also critical that you put on such a display of professionalism that even people out there in the audience who are witnessing the process, they tend to walk away impressed. And I can't think of any better way of advertising your business than to spread it by word of mouth or impressing people who are in attendance at the funeral service. So I don't know if you get my drift. I'm saying I'm not discouraged at all. I see a huge demand for end-of-life services, and funeral homes are poised to line up to meet that demand. But it requires management. It requires that you think about growth in new ways, perhaps ways that you've never thought about them before. But at the end of the day, again, and this is, the growth, people, is a principle.
It applies to the individual as well as it applies to the firm. The individual is responsible for his having work skills that are relevant. He needs to be trained in selling ideas or explaining ideas, hopefully better than I am, to his customer audience. But that is how we do growth. That is how we achieve growth. And my hope for you is that you'll take to heart some of the things that we mentioned in this presentation and decide to sit down with your staff, take control of your firm, knowing that in the future, when the opportunities really are abundant, that you are able to capture and satisfy and continue to expand your operations such that even you and your staff can benefit from the higher standard of living that comes from doing things in a way that reflects excellence in service to your clients. I want to thank you so much.